Well, hello, and hello again to everybody that has chosen to tap in on this video as I get the opportunity to hold space with two great, impactful, monumental movements that have influenced my life in the pathways that I have walked through this level of peace through restorative justice. And so I want them to welcome themselves in. I am Regina Platt. Some call me the stepologist, others just call me simply the practitioner. And then here we go again, the other at the Topeka Center for Peace and Justice. I serve as the Restorative Justice Manager over all restorative justice matters within the department. And so I want to say thank you two for joining me. And so, Dr. Joel, I'll start with you.
Okay. Regina, thank you so much for having us. And we feel the same way about you. So thank you. By way of introduction, what I'll say, a few weeks ago, I was in a circle and the circle keeper didn't do an introduction go around. And I'm not sure if it was intentional or not, but we just dived right into our values. And then after the meeting, I realized that I didn't really know people's job titles and some of those things, but I knew their values. And I thought it was really perfect and fitting for restorative justice. Because one of the things I've learned about restorative justice is the focus on values. So, with that, I'm going to say I learned a lot of my values from my mother, the way she modeled values of humility and servant leadership and compassion and empathy and all of those things. I'm one of 10 kids in my family. And a fun little fact, Edward, I hope you don't mind me sharing this, but Edward and I recently made the connection that we are both from families of 10 children, and we are both the seventh child of 10 children. Um, so, um, in addition to that piece of things, I live in North Dakota. Fargo, North Dakota is where I live. I've been a restorative justice practitioner since 2005. I got to help oversee a statewide restorative justice program in North Dakota for about 13 years. And since 2022, I've got to serve as the executive director of NACRJ, National Association of Community and Restorative Justice. So that's me, and I will pass it to Dr. Valandra, Edward.
Well, as far as introductions go, I'll keep mine short and I'll start with the origin story of our people, and that way we'll, get through it quite just teasing. Um, I am Lakota. That's my people. Or a lot of times we call ourselves the Ochechi Shakoi Oyate, people of the seven fires. That's because we are seven groups, and I'm in my homeland. Uh, in which I always like to refer to it as settler-occupied homeland. And I'm only a stone's throw away from Joel. We're only about, I don't know, stone's throw would be about 3 or 4 hours away from each other on the Northern Plains scale. Um, and when people say someone just lives down the road, that means in the Northern Plains language, that's at least 200 miles. Uh, So again, I'm glad to be here. Regina and Joel, my favorite people, and um, I'm looking forward to this conversation. There's a lot of things I think we have to cover in this day and age, and it's important that people hear our voices. We amplify each other's voices in a way that we're consistent in what we feel, what we believe, and what we know to be right. So, yeah, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
This is amazing. And so one of my first questions I wanted us to look at is us defining, like, how did you define your pathway to peace? How did you define, with all the chaos that's happening in the world today, with the chaos you were born into, right? Because some of us we came in, there was a lineage of it before we ever arrived. How did you define your pathway to peace?
I'll volunteer Joel on that one.
Me first, Edward. Okay, I can go first. Um, the first thing that comes to mind, Regina, is so I had always wanted to be an architect from being like the littlest of being a kid. And so when I looked for colleges, I only looked for architecture schools. I went to college for architecture. And about a year and a half through architecture, I realized that this was not for me, that I wanted to work with people. So I made uh, a change during my college years. I only learned about restorative justice a few years after college. And I learned about it by becoming a restorative justice facilitator. At that time, we called it victim offender dialogue, VOD facilitator. And it just immediately made sense to me. It just made so much sense to me, this approach, and kind of how our traditional criminal justice system is, based on punishment and division and keeping people separate. And then I learned about this process of healing and the ability to bring people together who have conflict or where someone has harmed, someone. And then a few years after that, in 2008, I attended my first circle, and that just sealed the deal for me, I guess is the way I'll say it, that I just fell in love with that process. On a personal note, I want to say that, or I'll say that growing up gay in North Dakota in the 1980s, 90s, 2000s. And when I say growing up, I mean as a teenager, a person in their 20s until I was 30 years old, that part of my identity was something that I did not feel was valued or wanted, is the way I look at that. And if my way of describing it sometimes, that if life is a metaphorical circle, then I was not a part of that circle. And not only was I not a part of the circle, I was banished from the circle because of that part of my identity. And I think that is why I gravitated towards circle. And I remember one of those core, I believe there's the seven core assumptions of circle practice. And one of those is that every human is needed for the gifts that they bring and all of the identity that brings. And I think that had a real personal impact on me when I started to realize that all parts of my identity are valuable and needed and is a gift to this world. So it totally kind of shifted my worldview with that. And maybe the last thing I'll say is that this is just a constant, or I think Regina, your question was about path to peace, our journey. Yeah, it's a constant process. It's a constant evolution. It's something that I work on every day, and it's just a constant process. It's not a sometime thing. So I'm still on that journey in my life. So yeah, those are the things that come to mind for me, and I will pass it to you, Edward.
Okay. There's no doubt that this pathway to peace um, has a lot of things in it. And I would agree with what Joel says, and then what Regina, what you said. Like, we're kind of born, especially if you're indigenous or a person of color, you're kind of born into some chaos anyway. And how do you negotiate that chaos is, I think it, when you do that, you actually are on a journey to a pathway toward peace. So how you begin to understand your world around you, um, and other people. So for me, my pathway to peace began uh, in the womb, in the womb of my mother. And the people in the community, as Lakota people, we are very collective oriented. We think collectively in the good of the people, the good of the child. And while colonization has done a lot of damage to my community, my nation, there are still strong remnants of what it means to be uh, a human being. And so, seeing that, in my formative years, I just seen the good in my community. The good that I see in my community um, is reflected. There's a song that reminds me, like the good that the people see in me is reflected in the community, and the good that I see in the community is in me. So we have this um, reciprocal understanding that when I say I mean we. When I when we say we mean I. And so those Lakota values that we're exposed to helped us define our relationships with our own community and then with the outside world. So that I think once we heard the racial epithets, the slurs, that didn't hurt us as much as people might have imagined because we get our validation within our people and not externally. And then so going with that, trying to be a good relative, trying to build on relationships, has defined a pathway toward peace. So I want to reach out to the communities that are experiencing what I would call colonialism and reach out and say, we are in this together. And it's not just a matter of saying, well, we're oppressed communities, like with my Black and brown relatives and other marginalized communities. It's not that oppression defines us and therefore we form or we forge a coalition, but who are we that as a people that we can understand one another and get to know one another and know our strengths and know our weaknesses. So um, I think to me that is really critical on a pathway toward peace is reaching out and being open and saying, yeah, uh, colonization has influenced my thinking, but it hasn't defined my thinking. It has influenced, but not has defined it. So then I reach out and I find a lot of intersections with other communities that were able to forge alliances, forge relationships. And that is, I guess, would be a pathway toward peace.
You both, thank you both for being vulnerable and very open in your sharing. As you were both walking through your pieces, I could only sit and think of two pieces of myself. One was on this pathway, whether it was in my mother's womb or whether it is once I got pushed out into society, right? From my parents' house out into society. One of the pieces was connections. It was very pathways to peace for me was connection. Um, and then the other factor is pathways to peace for me was being able to stand authentically in my identity. Um, because there was so much push for me to conform to what others seen was right that it took a moment until I was in my adulthood was the moment when it was like your difference makes the difference. Like it is okay for you, to be loud when you're loud or soft when you're soft, or it could be the creator that you are. It is okay. Your chocolate it's antioxidants, right? When you come into the space, everybody needs antioxidants. So that means they need to see you. They need to come in contact with you. But to see me too did not come until I connected with who I was. And it was okay to fully be me. And so that was part of that journey of the pathway to peace. So from the inside the belly all the way until I stepped out through the different layers of what we call community, that's when I touched me, right?
Yeah.
And so Our next question, it actually flows right into that. I asked the question of what's in your tool belt of expertise? What's in your tool belt of expertise as um I guess I began in 2016, right? I fell in love with restorative justice, restorative practice pieces, and the culture became, well, I was in love before. I just didn't know his name, right? I love saying that. I was in love before um, because I was already doing these practices. I was already meeting in circle. I was already desiring to connect with people. I was already grounded in the earth and wanting to connect and wanting to understand. Um, I was already reimagining this nation, this world outside of colonization. And so it had already begun. But when you think about your tool belt of expertise, because y'all have been in the game longer than me, what are some things that you would tell an organization or an individual that is walking this walk of through a pathway of peace? What would you say to them? Joe, go Joe.
So what tools, um, I guess some personal things pop in my head first, just on an individual level. And when I think of the word expertise, I do think about something that one of my early teachers said to me, who I did view as an expert in this field, but he often would say there are no experts, in this, that we are all learning and we are all students of this. And I have tried to come at it from that same approach. Um, I was thinking, or I think about this, Regina, as I said, maybe on a personal level with some personal attributes. But I think some tools that I have learned from restorative justice is the capacity to listen, you know, and I remember being in my first circle, and I didn't know anything about circle at this point. This was 2008, and there were like 60 people in this circle. And I remember the talking piece going around the circle, and then it came back to the circle keeper, and I was like, wow, that took, a long time probably. And then the circle keeper said, okay, I'm going to pass it around now a second time. And I was thinking, what? We're going to send this thing, around another time. But I view that as that at that point, I probably just did not have the capacity to sit and listen, and as I think about, everything that's going on in our world and all the things that we're grappling with in our country and our world, I think the capacity to listen, either on an individual level or on an organizational level, that we can just listen and we don't always have to be giving advice and listening to respond, but we're just listening to, that person. And that comes from my training of working with victims of crime, that we were trained to just listen to this person and not to fix it or to give advice, but just to listen. So that's one of the personal skills in my toolbox. Um, Another thing on a personal level, as I think about the state of our world right now, is that being trained as a restorative conferencing facilitator, in which I've worked with both parties, the person who caused harm and the person who has been harmed. I, over the past 20 years, have heard stories from two different perspectives, from the perspective of this party and the perspective of the other party. And it has shifted the way I think about stories or, um, hot topic things that might be in the news, that I recognize there is another perspective in this, that this one story is one story, but there's another, story. And I think about the way our social media algorithms are created, that it's very good at showing us exactly what we want to see, on any given topic. And even as I see that, even as I see things that are framed to me in the way that I agree with, what I've learned from conferencing is to know that there's another perspective, there's another side, of this. And that's been an important tool in my toolbox. Um, Thinking organizationally, and these are some kind of like tangible logistical things, but two things that have been really influential for me as I've done restorative practices is learning about adverse childhood experiences, the ACEs information, and historical trauma and individual trauma and family trauma, and also on implicit bias, the idea of implicit bias. And organizationally, when I was at a nonprofit as a practitioner, we would have all new employees go through those type of trainings and workshops because we just felt they were foundational components that everyone should be aware of, and know about. Um, and Regina, I know you are a champion of Circle, and Edward, too. But when it comes to tools, I know that Circle and people coming together in Circle in proactive ways and responsive ways when harm happens is one of the keys to the future and moving forward. I know there's many things that we need in our country and in our world, but I know that the concept of circle and being coming together in that ways is part of the puzzle. I know it is part of the puzzle. And my last thing, maybe I'll share because you asked about organizationally too, but I would just, as you explore restorative justice and restorative practices, to take your information from a lot of different sources or to seek out information and wisdom for a lot of different sources. I have been trained in the classroom, and in workshops, but I have also equally learned as much from our tribal nations in North Dakota, Standing Rock, Spirit Lake, Fort Berthold, where I got to learn from Indigenous elders that I could not have got in a training or a workshop. So it's like as we explore restorative justice and restorative practices, that we are absorbing information and seeking it out from a lot of different places. Um, with that, Edward, I will pass it over to you.
Wow. I okay, so one of my tools I think is I don't want to say education so much, but that's part of it. I think it's the literature. So that, for example, although I'm in Indigenous studies, I have also went into, Black literature, uh, Latino literature, some feminism, gender literature, um, literature on development, in terms of economics, things like that, just because I needed to know, um, who the writers were. So I think one of the things I did was to read a lot of literature from a lot of different um, areas, studies, if you want to call it that. And that helped me at least get an understanding of some of the major issues that were confronting all the different kind of communities throughout the world. And that was helpful to me to do that kind of reading. Um, and I think that's kind of my own thing because I have come across so many settlers that know so little about indigenous people. It borders, well, it goes beyond pathetic. That there's very eh, there's very little about um I mean settlers just know so little about indigenous people, and as a tool I decided I don't know a lot about the other communities of colors and other marginalized communities, so I better start doing some reading. And so over the decades I have read a lot of books from other people's perspectives. And that has helped me a lot in order to interact with those communities. And then I think Joel had mentioned other things like, having read the literature, I felt a little bit more comfortable going into these communities, like not knowing anything. I knew something. And so that helped a lot. And especially reading the literature by and of those communities. So, for example, one of my things I like to do is I like to read the literature, the social justice literature, if you want to call it that, movement literature of the mid 60s to mid 70s. That is edgy literature. I mean, my gosh, those guys, I loved how edgy they were in their writing and in their thinking. And I really appreciate that because that's something that I have not seen since the 60s or 70s. So there's good literature out there, but this seems to have a particular edge to it, and I appreciate that. So that's one thing, literature. I think the other thing that then f falls into that is the stories then. At least I have a larger framework. So when I hear the stories of my Black relatives and brown relatives and other relatives from oppressed or marginalized communities, I I'm not going in there just like not knowing something about that community. So that helps, and it's relatable. You can mention something about that community's, and then it's a hook. Then we can begin to ha trade and tell stories. I think that's one of the things too, is the storytelling that goes on. Um, Joel is right, listening. That is an extremely important tool. Um, and I, and it's a valuable tool or value, however you want to say that. I know among my nation, my people, um, I really appreciate, and I do a lot of contrast and comparing within my own nation and then outside my own nation. But I have to say, listening is critical. Just sitting silent and listening to what's being said. Um, even if you're not listening, just be quiet. Just be quiet. I have found going into settler society, oh my gosh, people don't even let other people finish their thoughts, perhaps in circles, maybe in other areas, but by and large, every day when I'm in settler society, I see people just cutting off people, interrupting people, talking over people, talking at each other. And I think that's a really critical tool that Joel raises. Just listen, you know. And, and hell, if you're not going to listen, just shut up. That's it. Just be quiet. And so that's that. And then probably the last thing I really think is a valuable tool is humor. Oh my gosh. I love to get among indigenous peoples, black and brown people, and just start teasing, telling lies on each other, giving each other a bad time, and just rolling with that because that really does have a way of showing your humanity that we can laugh at our own challenges, even though they may weigh heavy on us. We can laugh at them, put them in a different way, perspective, so we can laugh at them. And I think that humor is greatly missing from the restorative justice circles and the movement itself. Yeah. So those are my tools.
Thank you both. Joel, not Joel, Dr. Edwin, as you were speaking, I literally was like my hands were touching flowers. I was running through a field, right? Um, and it was as you were coming towards the end, because that's what it's like when you're in relationship with the right people and you're listening from the heart and you're connecting with them, the child can play again, right? The person can roam free and connect again. As an adult, right? We know which plants we shouldn't be touching or at what time and when and all these different things. We have this system that's been defined that's boxed us in. But as a kid, when you're connected and you feel safe, you just touch, you just roam, the wind blows and you're like, ooh, don't let it blow me away. But yeah, blow me away. I'll fall over and roll in the dirt any day. And so relationships are tools for me. Relationships are the foundational currency of humanity. And where there's a disconnect in relationships, normally that's because there's been a heart fracture or issue that has taken place. And so relationships are very important to me. In honoring people, it's another thing. Like honor, not only honor should we honor the elders, but we should honor the innovativeness and freshness of the youth that are coming in. We should honor the connect, like I'm in the age of the connector, right? And so I can connect with the older and I can connect with the younger, but authentically knowing who you are, that identity, that purpose piece, right? That positioning piece is very important to me. And I remember the day I realized that I was in the age of the bridge, the connector, and that I could connect with the youth, right? Not only could I connect with the youth, I can connect with the elders. But I noticed there was a disconnect from the elders and the youth. And so on my journey, what I've watched is me connect them together and
Mhm.
bring them in where they both sides felt safe. And so sometimes we don't know who we are or how we fit. And so we're trying to be in someone else's position. But the only position that you can authentically and powerfully operate in is the position called you. And so when I studied me, um, another tool is we should be learning, studying me, not only studying the outside, but studying me, right? I have to understand who I am and how I connect with all of humanity, not just one person or one culture or one tribe or one nation, but how I connect with all of humanity. And when I say humanity, then I go down, how do I connect with this platform called Earth that I've been given opportunity to be on, because it's all honor, right? It's all that it was a granting to us. It's not that we had to have it. This was a granting to us to be in this current day and age group and in the land mass that we're in and drinking the waters that we drink and connecting to the atmosphere that we're called. It's all interconnected. But if you're disconnected from any part, then you'll never really connect to who you are. So let's move some more because I like y'all. And our I'm for real, this is beautiful. So the last question that I have for you all is what encouragement would you give practitioners and advocates that are moving in this current day piece? What would be just some encouragement? Like, and I think we've done a lot of that as we've sat in this space, but what encouragement? Mine, before I pass, I would encourage self care. And actually, I don't really call it self care. I would call it take care of you. It's not selfish, it's selfless. If you give everything to everybody else and you die, then you can't help them become better. You can't support them. You can't stand with them. And so I really feel like even in the work as a practitioner, as a mother, as an advocate, now as a wife, um, if I don't hold space with me and listen to my body, then that means I'm being selfish and I'm going to cause other people to lose out that I was supposed to be bridging the gap for to go forward. And so I have to listen in so that I can live and not die. And I'll pass to Joel.
Thank you, Regina. I jotted down some of those things as you shared them. I so what advice? Um, One of the things is kind of what you hit on, Regina, already, the self-care piece. Um, the world can feel so heavy. I feel it in myself. Uh, I keep thinking maybe times are going to get easier, but I know that's probably not going to happen. That life is just challenging in a lot of different ways. So the way that we take care of ourselves, I think has to be at the forefront of everybody because I know that mental health is real. and burnout is real, you know, and just in life in general. But as a restorative justice practitioner, we are often in the place where we are the recipient of people's anger and, confusion with the justice system, and, helping them process their victimization or their trauma. And as a facilitator, you absorb those pieces, and, for us to be aware of that and how we, kind of shed some of those things that we bear sometimes because of the people that we serve. Um, Edward also wrote down when you talked about humor, and to build upon that, the word joy comes to mind. It's a word that I've been trying to focus on, that working in the field of restorative justice, or just, justice in general, advocacy, can be really difficult and challenging, as I just spoke to. But there are so many aspects that are so beautiful about these processes and this worldview and this approach. And to balance all of that heaviness with all of the joy, that it brings us, it's something that I think about. Um, I think, again, on a practical way, I've got to work with school systems, K-12 schools, a lot throughout my career. And often, especially in the early years, a school system wanted to implement restorative practices on the, we call it tier three in school systems, on the responsive end of things. But my advice would always be to implement restorative practices in your organization or your school or wherever it may be in proactive ways, to build it as the foundation of the way we operate as a community of people. Don't just implement it as this responsive intervention. Um, um, Let me see. The last few things, Regina, one of the things that I have found to be the biggest blessing in my role with NACRJ is getting to see people and programs that are operating across this country. And that is one of the perspectives that I hold when things get tough. That I know in rural areas like North and South Dakota, where Edward and I live, to the most urban of cities across this country, there are people who are working on peace and justice every single day, you know, and we don't always see that, in mainstream areas, but there are people who are doing this work everywhere. And my advice would be, no matter how small your piece of the puzzle seems or whatever it is you are doing, that adds up to something much bigger and has a cumulative effect impact on things. So to keep going and keep working towards peace and justice, because you are connected to so many other people across this country. And I think that's well, actually, I'm gonna share one more, and then Edward, I'll pass it to you. Another thing that I have learned from Circle is that all of us are operating under a very similar set of values. When you're in Circle and you sometimes write the value on a paper plate or a sheet of paper and you put it in the center of the circle. Since I've started doing Circle, I've kept those. So I have hundreds, if not 1,000 of those. And it's amazing how closely aligned all of the values are, you know, and I always keep that in mind when it seems we don't understand why people do the things they do, or, if someone's being difficult or challenging. I know that for the most part, every human being is operating under a set of values deep down, even though it doesn't always come out that way. But deep down, we have these set of values that we probably would all agree with. And one of the things I keep striving for is, how do we continue to create a world where people can live those values, live those values that are deep down. It is the biggest promise that I see of restorative justice and Circle. So with that, Edward, I will pass it to you.
let me say, it's just really hard to follow you guys. I mean, when you guys say everything, and my tendency to say what they said. However, I will venture like the encouragement. I would have to say, part of my sanity has as a Lakota, as an indigenous person, is dealing with the reality that I do live in. I mean, I live in a very colonized society. A lot of settlers in my homeland. Narratives that are being talked don't speak to me. Things like American exceptionalism, the American experiment, all these things they just don't resonate with me at all. And so I think one of the things is you just got to assess your reality that you live in. And so it keeps me from it keeps me centered in a way that I that the reality that I live in is really not only anti-indigenous, but I know it's anti-black, anti-gay, a lot of these things. That's just the nature of the reality that we live in. That helps me, I think, um, understand uh, how I am to approach the challenges that are facing us. So that's one thing is to understand and assess your environment because that helps you. I would say that helps you find like-minded people. Because as Joel and Regina says, there's a lot of people who are thinking otherwise of what's going on. And this is a very challenging and unprecedented time for a lot of people. And we don't know where it's going to go. I mean, and with that, I would say the other thing is a lot of times the structure or narrative has been set for us to how to maybe address the challenges that we are facing right now and experiencing right now. I would say, the set solutions for addressing what we're facing um, is not always the answer. For example, people may or may not agree with what I'm about to say, but part of it is like everyone's looking to the midterms to maybe take control of the House, possibly the Senate, as a break, as a way to, stop the craziness. But again, from my perch as an indigenous person, I'm not sure getting a Democratic House is going to solve the issues. They're bigger than what we're dealing with right now. And so how do we think outside that? What are the alternatives? What are the other realities that we can engage in? And I think restorative justice in circles has a possibility of allowing us to think, how would this world look in a different way? How can we just not default to the electoral solution or tinker around the margins so we incrementally move toward a more just society. I would argue that we have to be radical in our thinking, radical in our behavior, radical in our values. And I think that goes to what my dear gentle warrior sister Regina says is be authentic, be who you are. The way to decolonize yourself is to be who you are. And so that's part of it. And I have a relative, Charmaine Whiteface, and the thing that she always, every time we get together as a group in circle, she says, prayer is the most powerful tool you can have. And as Lakota people, we pray a lot. We use prayer in our decision-making processes. it's not something we do on Sunday. It's not something or funeral or anything. We pray all the time, and it's part of our decision-making process. So I would say, my relative, Charmaine Whiteface, always says prayer. Make prayer part of your decision-making process. Now, not just reserve it for those special occasions. So that's kind of the thing that I would encourage others to do as well. So,
Wow, wow, wow. This has been a powerful, and it was a short session, you all. Very short session, but this has been powerful. I guess I do want us to do a checkout where you all, if you have some words for Topeka Center for Peace and Justice, this is their 40th year. And it has changed with executive directors. It has changed based off the missions of what was needed, right? And so love on them a little bit. You all got to meet Pastor Carl Frazier last week. He was amazed by you. And people are always amazed when I be like, I've been knowing them, right? Because I always have to put that on there. Like, we ain't new to this. We true to this. This is my family. I've been knowing them. So you just got to meet who I've been knowing. And he's a boss at what he does. And so is he. Bye, y'all. Boom, drop it. And so, Pastor Frazier, if you see this, just know I ain't hating. I'm just congratulating that you got to meet some of the most powerful people I know. And so, if you had some words to give to the work the executive director is doing in his team, what would you say to him? Somebody jump in any minute. Joe, you go. Order.
Sure. Um, well, in my checkout, one of the words I wrote down, Edward, I love what you said about to be radical in our values, to be radical in our values. So that's one little mantra I am leaving with. Regina, for about 17 years, where I did restorative justice in North Dakota, I worked for a nonprofit organization that was around for 100 years. We had just celebrated our 100th anniversary uh, in 2020, about, I believe. But I guess what I think about with your organization being 40 years old, to one, celebrate. I do believe in the concept of celebration, and because this work can be so hard, so to have an organization that has been around for 40 years is something to celebrate, and to to see ourselves that you all are, and all of us, we are the ones who are here right now in this moment, leading this. And it's to honor the work of, for your organization, the ones who started this 40 years ago. And someday we won't be in these roles, and we are creating whatever it's going to be for the next generation to come. So I try to hold that perspective of for us to do our thing at our moment in time. So, Dr. Valandra, Edward, I'll pass it to you.
well, being the 40th uh, year, um, I'm just at a loss to how to express what I'm feeling about where we can go, what we can do. But I do appreciate, you know, all the people that I met at the conference. I mean, in my talk, I said, well, I know we can envision a pathway to peace. I'm not sure what that looks like or how to envision it, but I know it exists and I can feel it. And when Joel talked there, he said there are many pathways to peace. And I think for us, we're going to be searching for those pathways. And it's going to mean for us that we then begin to, understand who we are, what is our purpose, and part of that is just to be better relatives to each other, to stop this craziness that has been going on for 533 years. It's just going to come to a new way of looking at things, I imagine. So I would say to the people that I met in Kansas and who will watch this, uh, I think we're at a pivot point. How we pivot is going to be the question. But there are a lot of people, as Joel was saying, a lot of people out there who want to see things in a different light. So I leave with that. Yeah.
And Dr. Edward, did you have a one word checkout or a few words checkout for yourself from this space?
The one word checkout. Wow. I would say hope. Yeah.
And I would on that because hope is what I see in light in this space today. You all inspired me. In this space today, you refortified, refreshed me, renewed me. You connected to me. And part of our journey as practitioners, we connect.
Yeah.
And we don't connect as though we're puzzle pieces. We connect with our hearts and with our minds and with our spirits, realizing that we carry each other forward, step by step, moment by moment, word by word, action by action, because we believe that we're going somewhere on this
Mm.
pathway to peace. And so, again, I thank you both for allotting this time to love on me, pretty as can be. And so I look forward to our next time we see each other. It's not goodbye, but it's I'll see you later. Thank you all so much.